Hey, welcome to the channel. My name is Jason, and here I talk about all things story. And the story I'm talking about today is one of my own. We have reached episode 38 of my series, Worth 1,000 Words, where I write a 1,000 word short story based on a piece of artwork. Yes, without an outline. And today we have a darker story. So I'm wearing a darker shirt to help go with the mood of the piece. And this is one that I bookmarked some time ago, and I periodically, when I don't find one immediately on the trending site on ArtStation, I'll go back to some bookmarks of things I liked and find something of inspiration there. And this is the one I did today. It's kind of a darker fantasy piece, horror, if you will, maybe. I don't know. I guess that's up for you to decide. But for the music, I needed something that fit, something that was mournful, melancholic, if you will. That album I discovered was by an artist called From the Mouth of the Sun, and what I listened to was called The Sleep Stations EP. I highly suggest you check them out. It was a great accompaniment to this one, and an artist that I just discovered myself. I love discovering new artists because I hate to have the same, 9 or 10 ambient slash instrumental artists on my list. So it's always great to find someone new. But not many updates today, so I'll keep it short. Let's check out this week's artwork. This week's artwork is titled Hrani Grobi, and it's by an artist named Igor Galkin from Derhachi, Ukraine. So I was glad to find something that had more than one figure to deal with because you know that breeds conversation. But despite the fact that we have three figures here, we have two appears to be women over what appears to be a coffin draped in some kind of cloth where there are two candles burning. And in the background, we see a man as well, or possibly a woman. It's hard to say. A cloaked figure. But what are they doing? Why are their hands on the table? It's almost as if they're holding these coffins down, I guess, because, clearly a lot of them are floating away. So it's kind of an interesting concept. I don't know if these people are mourners or are they guardians of these coffins, these dead people, or are they ghosts? In any case, it's a very intriguing image. I love the lighting coming down directly from the ceiling. There's dust about, and it's a very gloomy, atmospheric piece, and I love this stuff. But you already know I like dark things, so Igor, thank you for this amazing piece of artwork. Hopefully my story tells a tale that does it justice. So let's see what I came up with. The candle's flame was cold. It flickered, and a thread of smoke lifted into the air, so Marin knew it was real. She thought to touch it, but she couldn't bring her hands from the sheet eaten by time. Barely there it was. However, she enjoyed the hardy threads on her palm, and she sent her fingertips to explore its surface. It was dark here, except for the faint candlelight, but after a time the moon showed itself, and when she saw what it revealed, she nearly screamed. Walls, high and coarse with stone, were dressed in foul whispers that came from dark places, tunneled within them. If she could only bring her hands to her ears to silence those whispers. If she could only bring her hands to her eyes to hide what the moonlight revealed. It showed her more than walls festooned with empty holes that breathed horror. It brought the truth of what lay before her. No longer were her hands or the sheet caressed with the warm tones of the candle. The silver moon struck her naked with its frigid gaze, leaving her alone but for the emptiness of a mausoleum. She dropped to her knees because it would at least limit her view, and she pressed her face into the hanging sheet. She would bring it back to its former glory. She was good with her hands, with the needle and thread. She would repay it for the comfort it had given her in this terrible place. Comfort didn't last long, for she saw through the sheet to see nothing beneath what she had assumed was a table. This was not a table at all, but a box without legs. It had to be the dust, her reeling mind, that conjured such illusions. Perhaps she needed to stand again, allow the blood to flow where it needed. So she did, and was greeted by a ghostly face. It hovered there, expressionless in the gloom. Still, she could not move her hands to run away. They wanted to remain, grounded to the only thing she could feel, and soon the rest of her was possessed by their desire. The face belonged to a woman, smooth of skin and gentle of eye, her beauty not sullied by the sharp rays of the moon. She did not speak, merely touched the wick of an unlit candle opposite the other Marin had not noticed. When the woman removed her finger, a flame sprung to life, as cold as the other. "These fragile things will do nothing to warm you up," the woman said. "Here, let me." And she went to Marin, took the shawl from her own shoulders, and draped it over Marin's. "Better?" the woman said to her. Her breath smelled of nothing. Marin nodded, unable to trust her voice. The woman returned to her spot opposite Marin, hands mirroring her own. "This place is not to be feared, child," the woman said. "It's dark and cold and smells of both, but you will find comfort here, soon." "I don't want to find anything but the way out," Marin said, surprising herself. She pressed her lips together and swallowed her tongue. The woman glanced at Marin's hands, smiled softly before gazing back into her eyes. "This place isn't always so dreary, child. The skylight there, it welcomes the sun when the time is right. I am sorry that this time is not now. You will love to bask in her glory, hear her laughter, her secrets, feel her touch." Marin felt something at that moment, as if the sun had found its way here, through the candle's flames. Warmth growing from her fingernails, over her knuckles, to her wrists, burrowing up her sleeves to reach her heart, the woman said. "The sun is a she, didn't you know?" The woman chuckled distant wind chimes. "When?" Marin said. "Oh, it's difficult to tell anymore. She is a tricky one, generous but fickle at times. More than anything, you mustn't fear her brother, who wraps us in his steel blanket now. Only when the family is complete shall she show herself and take you into her arms." "I don't understand," Marin said. "Why am I here? Why can't I move my hands?" Tears squeezed from her eyes. "Look there," the woman said, nodding behind Marin. Marin saw a cloaked man, his hands arranged similarly to hers atop what she now saw resembled the legless box before her, floating, unquestionably housing a corpse. The man blew out the single candle there and was one with the smoke left behind. The coffin rose higher and higher, its shadow moving across the ground toward her like a pit to consume her. Marin wept, tore her hands from what she knew now was a coffin beneath her own, stumbled back a few steps until the gaze of the woman found her and brought her back. "Good," the woman said. "She accepts you. You accept her." "I accept no one," Marin shrieked. "Show me from this place." "If only I could, but that is not my duty, child. It is yours." Marin ran away from the woman, into the darkness, guiding herself along the walls, but no matter how far she went, she always came back to where she started, her hands where they started. "All roads lead to home," the woman said. Home. Marin's hands revisited the peaks, the valleys, the imperfections that were perfect, like family. Marin felt the candle's flames, their invitation. She blew out one, then the other. Around her, other coffins rose toward the moonlight to where she would shortly go and hope to find the sun. "Beautiful, no?" the woman said, admiring the display. "I never tire of it." Marin watched her fingers swirl into gray tendrils, then her arms, then all of her until she could watch no longer. Her heart, though, she could feel, and it burned as warm and as bright as the sun. I wish these got easier. Unfortunately, they never do, but alas, that is the struggle of the writer, I suppose. So says Mr. Stephen Pressfield, and he's a very wise man and successful writer, so that is good enough for me. Funny thing, I looked up the title of this piece, Hrani Grobi, Now, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly at all, but it is Slovenian for food course, and not course as in a four-course meal, but course as in rough. Coarse. And I think if I would have known that before diving into the story, it would have been a very different story. However, I think that's okay because I'd like to know as little as possible. I don't want anything to influence where the story takes me, where this picture takes me, because there's plenty of times where you see descriptions by the artist on the piece here that talks about the little backstory of what's going on. I try to avoid those at all costs if my eye does not drift down to that area. And thankfully, I did not look this up. I think it would have been a fun story to tell based on that, considering they do look like they are at tables. They look like you don't see any platters or plates or anything like that on these floating coffins, but they do. They are reminiscent of tables with a tablecloth. But anyway, I didn't go that way. So you'll see that it took me about 3 minutes of just sitting and staring at this thing to even decide where to begin, because as you know, it's important to choose a POV character and decide where this character is going to go. So as you know, because you have listened to the story or read it on my site, that I chose to go with a restless spirit. So presumably the woman on the right is, the one inside the coffin, and there has to be some kind of ritual of some kind where, she lets go, she gives into her fate to be, I guess, released or set free or whatever you want to call it in the afterlife. And there's no particular ghostliness to the woman on the right with her back to us. And but I wanted to have a conversation of some kind because you clearly have two people facing each other. There needed to be an exchange. And I think another interesting element might be someone mourning, right? Like, it's funny. I always think of this stuff in hindsight after I've read the story, but imagine something where these people are kind of, they're not ready to let their loved ones go. Or maybe these coffins float into oblivion somewhere. It could be a good thing, it could be a bad thing, someone not being able to let go of their lost loved ones, or it could be something bad, maybe that if the bodies travel to wherever up is, maybe that's a bad sign or takes them to some dark afterlife. I don't know. Because it's almost one of those things where, it's a contest of who can hold on the longest. And you see this guy over on the right here, he's by himself, he's alone. So I'm assuming that he would probably tire out a lot sooner than these two women here, because they could take turns, I guess. But here I go talking about the story I didn't write. Let's talk about the story I wrote. Yeah, I decided she was a restless spirit, and I had to quickly think of a way to, like, why can't she be released? And so immediately I thought of the candles because they're present there. But I did want to start this piece without her, without it looking exactly like you see it here. I wanted this to be either the midpoint or somewhere toward the end, because it is a pretty epic scene. You have all these floating candles, you have what looks to be moonlight just spilling into the mausoleum. So it doesn't feel like it's, now you could start in media res, you could start right in the middle and work that way, but I wanted a little bit of build up, and I remember actually thinking, should I have this woman lost here, lost in the darkness, and she sees these candles and she's drawn to them? That probably would have been a cooler start. Here we go, trying to rewrite the story that has been written, but I think that's just how it is. We always look back on our work and think, okay, well, what could we do to make it better? But that's not the point of the exercise. There's no outline, so that stuff is bound to happen. Because, as Hemingway famously said, writing is rewriting, or I'm paraphrasing. That's not the direct quote. But anyway, so I thought that, I don't know why I personified the sun and the moon. I use that as a device for her to accept who she was. And I kind of use the analogy that they're a family, and that, I don't know why this came to my head, but maybe it's because I don't get along with my brother very well. But you know how you don't choose your family, you can choose your friends. And so that's kind of an old adage saying that, you can, or you should, or you're forced to, whatever whatever way you want to choose. But your family is just your family, and they kind of get a free pass. And so I wanted to make, the create kind of a conflict between the sun and the moon, right? They're opposites, and so the moon is creating this very gloomy atmosphere and making her feel completely unsafe. And so I thought I would start there and just I know it's not very strong. I know I'm talking out I'm thinking out loud and telling you, all these thoughts, and the more I talk, the more I don't like it, but it is what it is. And that's the entire point of this exercise, is not to write a perfect story without an outline or having any idea of where you're going to go. It's just to get something out and hopefully create a cohesive narrative. So I think that's my goal. I think I did succeed here. I think I did tell a cohesive narrative. It has a hook. It has kind of a turning point, and it has a conclusion. So that does exist in the story. Whether or not it's the best version, I'm saying it's definitely not the best version, but it's there. And so that's, I think, if you're doing any kind of exercises like this, writing a story, writing a scene, even, I mean, these are essentially scenes. Just make sure you have those. There's technically like five tenets or five commandments of storytelling, according to Sean Coyne. So you can go by that. I loosely go by it. I don't know that you need precisely all of those things, but I think a turning point is definitely very important. It's when the polarity of the scene shifts a different direction, because you want all of your scenes, all of your stories to have a polarity shift. And this is something Robert McKee says as well. That's where Sean Quinn got it from. And a lot of writers go by this, is that, the beginning of your scene, the beginning of your story should be the opposite, or, different anyway. Positive, negative, negative to double negative, than where it began. And so I always think in those terms, and I really think that's the easiest thing for me to grasp. And it's funny because it always creates a satisfying scene. It always makes it feel like it's going somewhere. When you have a character start out or end the scene, or end the book, or end the chapter exactly in the same polarity that they began, it'll feel empty. Trust me, it'll feel very empty. So you wanna switch that up. And so here, obviously, the polarity shift would be, she's confused and frightened, or yeah, I guess those are the best words. Just ignorant of where she is, and then finally at the end, she lets go. So it's really, you could say it's from lack of control to control, which would be two polarity shifts, and or one polarity shift on 2 points. So that's what I did. That's what I always think of, and I did succeed here in that regard. And I kind of created this woman off to the left as, kind of the guardian of this place. I guess she's wandering from coffin to coffin, I guess, to allay any fears and the people she talks to. And she finds beauty here, and she admits that, like, word by word, that she never tires of it. And so, how she got here or why she's here, I don't quite know, but it's really just her duty. She's kind of the caretaker of this place, and actually the poor lost souls that haven't quite let go. And so I think that was kind of a fun exercise to figure out through dialogue. Marin, our main character, doesn't really speak much. The woman speaks, more frequently, which I think that would be common in the dynamic they are. She's the one who knows, and then Marin's the one who doesn't know. And then I was lucky enough to have this other gentleman or female, or just, let's say, cloaked figure, as I said earlier, to be a way to educate Marin. So that's what I did. I had him sort of accept his fate sooner, right? And it could have been that, like, this woman hadn't spoken to him yet, but I decided she already had, or maybe there's other people here who serve her same function. He was the way to let Marin realize, where she needed to go, or what she was. And it's funny, I never really addressed death or anything like that in this. It was kind of implied, and I'm glad I did that, because I think it would have been a little bit on the nose if, Marin was kind of shrieking about, like, I'm dead? What do you mean I'm dead? I can't be dead. I just think that's too cliche. So I just had her kind of, be frightened because she doesn't know why she's here. All she wants to do is escape. She never says, like, I want to live. I don't want to be dead. she just, wants to get the hell out of here, wherever that may be. And so another device, what I began with is the candles, because they're another piece. And so, when I'm doing these stories, I'm always trying to look for elements. Okay, what elements in the scene can I use and people to drive the story forward or have some kind of significance? Because I'm assuming that when any artist paints stuff like this, they aren't just willy nilly painting things or positioning things in certain spots just because to fill the space. I feel like there's a purpose there, and art is really no different than writing. You're just creating with a different medium. At least I hope. I think artists with the best intentions, or artists that respect the craft more, will do that. And I've encountered plenty of pieces that you could just really tell that the artist understands conflict, they understand story and staging and composition, the cinematography, right? They get it. And those ones I find are extremely easy to write stories for, because the conflict, the problem, the story is just right there. And I think this is one of them. Now, I don't, the conflict being, why are these people holding down these coffins? Because there doesn't appear to be an argument. I mean, I guess, these two women off to the left could be arguing. That's a given. But I just love the weirdness of it all. There's plenty of art pieces on here that have coffins, or their mausoleums or crypts or whatever. But nothing like this. Nothing with people looking like they're trying to hold them down. And so, because of the configuration of their hands, everybody is that way. I'm assuming the woman on the left is as well. You can't quite see her hands or her arms, but it looks as though that's what's going on. There's significance there, right? Because these coffins are lifted, are floating, the ones without people near them. I'm assuming that's what they're doing. They're trying to hold them down. But I think it would have been a cool experiment or exercise to do some world building around why these people are holding these coffins, as opposed to a restless ghost having to be laid to rest. I think it works both ways, and I think that's what I love about storytelling, is that there's infinite ways something can go, and you have to choose one of those. And I think that's always the hardest thing, because when I'm planning a story, like my longer form stuff where I'm actually outlining, you're always thinking like, okay, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this. Now, which one is the best one? And that's always the hardest thing to do. And I think that it can be illuminated through character, right? So if you know your characters well, that will help guide you in the way that makes the most sense. But a lot of times that doesn't really help, because sometimes your character may be in an emotional state that they're acting irrationally because of conflict, because of rising action. And so sometimes you just have to do what feels right. And I know that sounds a little woo-woo, a little bullshit, like what feels right. But I think what I mean by that is that when you read enough stories, you read enough books on craft, you watch enough movies, you start to internalize these elements of story, and to the point where they're second nature. Now, I'm not saying that I'm some genius storyteller at all, not even close, but I think that I've consumed enough content to have good story instinct. Not all the time, but I think, more often than not, let's just say 50-50, I have good story instinct, because you kind of have to look at it from all these different angles, from every single character, from a direction that, or from a point that makes it feel like things are propelling forward, the motivations are sound. And it's just one of those things that you learn by observing. You learn by observing the greats. And if you're a reader, a voracious reader, but not a voracious watcher of film, film consumer, I highly suggest you branch out, because I've learned so much from movies and for writing. And I'm not talking about dialogue, of course, but just how to flow a story. I think I write pretty visually. I try to minimize exposition or unnecessary narration, because I want to make my stories and my books feel more cinematic. I want the world to come alive in your head, and really, there's no other medium better than film to do that with. So I highly encourage you to, if you're not already, watch a wide variety of films, not just a certain genre. Same thing when you read. I know I've said this probably plenty of times in these and these rambles, if you ever watch these. But read broadly, watch broadly. You're going to learn so much and gain so much, and make your stories just so much richer, right? Because if you're only reading fantasy novels, you're never going to really understand really well what makes a good thriller. Because if you want to add some thrilling elements into your fantasy novel, which you damn well should, uh, you're not going to get that from a fantasy writer, right? I mean, I'm sure there's a few fantasy writers out there that make excellent thriller fantasies or have thrilling elements in their fantasies, but I don't know. I've read a lot of fantasy, and I beg to differ. A fantasy does certain things really really well. Every genre does their own thing really really well. They all have strengths and weaknesses, and so it's important to glean all of those things from those different genres. But anyway, back to the story. I'm wrapping up. And as I said in the beginning, these never get easier. This one, I believe I ran to an hour and a half, maybe a little over an hour and a half, if I remember correctly. And I don't know, sometimes they just happen. Sometimes they flow, sometimes they don't. I think a lot of times when I write ones that are more internal, like with a singular character, like they're just going about their thoughts, they're observing something, those things seem to go quickly because it's almost like stream of consciousness. Whereas when you're trying to set the stage and you're trying to make an active scene with the group of characters, that can be both easier and difficult depending, because you have the opportunity to create a lot more words quickly because of dialogue. Dialogue will always get you more words, and sometimes I've been in danger when I get in those situations, particularly with, I think it was episode 2 or 3. It was Robo Rats, where I had like 5 to 7 people in the scene and trying to balance them and then create a cohesive story through that with, you know, at exactly 1,000 words was definitely a challenge, because when you have, as if you've ever read Immediate Fiction, which is a great craft book, it is very apparent that having more characters in a scene or in a novel or in a story will balloon it quickly, just from the mere fact that the interactions between more characters will go up exponentially. But you can see that I didn't quite hit 1,000 words yet. I'm at 984, and I'm going back and filling some things in. I don't even believe I went to the very end. I think I stopped and came back, hoping that I would find something that would reveal how the ending should go. I know this woman. I already knew the ending. Like right when I started, I said, okay, I'm gonna have this girl on the right, this woman on the right, be a restless spirit, and just see where that leads me. And really just led me to a conversation, because I always knew the end. And as I've said many, 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 many times, always know the ending or have an idea, because if you don't have a target, you're going to meander and take a lot of false roads. So, which, can be rewarding in its own right, I guess, but I try to avoid it because I like to know where I'm going in a story, because everything needs to matter. Where you end needs to mirror where you began. And so you can't really know that unless you know where you're going, unless you want to do a hell of a lot of revising, which is totally up to you. I'm still chipping away, 8 more words to go. Um, talking about these, it's funny because, they look like coffins to me, but I was struggling with, what should I call them? Should I call them a sarcophagus? Should I call them something else? But I did know that I wanted her to not know what they were at the beginning. I wanted to create sort of a place of comfort for Marin, and that's what that tablecloth was, despite how threadbare it was. And I actually used that device for her to finally see it, but see where she was. But here we are at 1,000 words, and I think I just kind of tightened some stuff up here at the end, and that is it. Welcome to the end, dear viewer. I am so glad you made it. This is where I talk about what I liked, what I didn't like about the story, and everything in between. I successfully told a story with a bit of conflict, a hook, a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I feel like there was a polarity shift. And if you don't know what I mean by polarity shift, a scene, a book, a chapter, whatever segment of story you have needs to change polarity. Positive to negative, negative to positive, negative to double negative. I think you get the idea. in case you did not listen to my analysis previously. So I achieved that. I think I achieved the mood of the scene. I feel like I conveyed in words what was being shown in the piece, perhaps the mental states of the characters. But what I didn't like, are the fact that I came up with even better ideas while I was talking through the analysis. And it always happens that way. It always seems to happen that way for me anyway. And it's a bit of a bittersweet moment because I always tell myself that I don't want to change these. Yes, I can go back and edit them. I can clean them up for grammatical and, consistency errors, but I don't want to change the heart of what the story is because I feel like it's very important to keep that intact because that is really what I came up with. All the little syntax issues and things like that, those don't really matter because those are the fault of the time limit. But the more I think about it, man, I really like the idea of these people holding down these coffins. It's a great ticking clock element. And if you know anything about ticking clocks in story, those are things you definitely want to have. They create suspense, they create anticipation, they create mystery, so many things, and they really heighten the story on so many levels and keep the readers engaged and wondering what's going to happen next. And here I am thinking out loud again, but I'm going to keep going because I want to show you the process that I go through every time on these. And that's that I really like the idea of just these women that you see here. This man, like maybe he's the first one to go, right? He gives up and he falls down, and we do see what the result of that is. Or maybe one of the women fails, or maybe it's a conversation where all of the conflict is between is in the conversation of these two women that directly relates either metaphorically or literally to the fact that they're holding up this coffin. Maybe it's like their father or their mother and their two sisters, and there's a rivalry there. And man, I could go on and on and on. And I hopefully you can see how that would probably make a better story than what I came up with. But again, not the point. The point is that, and I talked about this in the analysis, is that things can go near infinite ways or infinite ways possibly, depending on the elements you have to work with. And that's the most challenging yet beautiful thing about storytelling, is that not only is everyone the hero of their own story, all of these characters, even the rats in the walls, the fact that all of these elements can go so many different ways and create very satisfying stories. And it's really your job to find out which one of those is the best for you and serves the story the best. And I'll give you a hint. You probably won't find it, but that's okay because your perspective matters when telling the story, and looking back on things in hindsight and how to improve them is just going to make you a better storyteller. When you think what you did is awesome always, that means you're not improving. So if you think your stuff sucks, either mid-draft or after it's published or whatever it may be, that's okay. I feel the same way every time. But I guarantee you there's probably some great nuggets in there to find that you will appreciate. All right, the rant is over. Thanks again for sticking with me this far. I hope you had a good time. I hope you learned something. At least I hope this got you to think about something with the own work that you are approaching, hopefully right now. And if you'd like to support the channel, give me a like if you like the video, subscribe if you like story-related content, check out my books, join my Discord, hang out with me on my live streams. Everything is down below in the description. And keep reading, keep writing, and I will see you next week. Thanks. Bye.